Welcome to the 5 Thread podcast and Series 3, Episode 1, which was such an amazing episode to record with the brilliant Jo Redfern. I've been a fan of Jo's for quite some time because she is working in this intersection of tech, younger audiences and sports, and she just has such a fantastic way of explaining how this landscape in sport is changing. She explains everything in a very practical, down-to-earth way, which makes it really easy to understand. In this episode, we talk about a lot of things. We talk about how sports fandom is changing. We talk about the link between digital experiences and physical participation. And we also talk about what sports organizations can do if they're interested in this, but not really sure where to start. It was a really fascinating conversation and one that I absolutely loved. I'm sure Jo is going to be back on the podcast to update us as things change. But if you're interested in sports and you're interested in digital, this is definitely an episode for you. Today, I am so excited to have Jo Redfern on the podcast. I've been a fan of yours on the Quiet for quite some time. And I think everything that you talk about is absolutely fascinating. So I'm really excited for today's conversation and to dig in. But could you give us a bit of background about what you do and an introduction to yourself?
Of course. And thank you very much for having me on. I'm really thrilled that we've got a chance to have a chat about this stuff. Yes, so Jo Redfern, I've spent the greater part of 20 years in and around the world of kids media. So way back, started with the team that launched Peppa Pig. And in the intervening time, I've spent periods at Disney and at WWE and BBC Children's in the UK. And what that did was really give me a hyper focus on how young people consume content media, where, why, what they love, what they're doing whilst they're there. And in the last 5 years, that's taken me away from more traditional platforms and broadcast and into the realms of YouTube and Roblox. So I've worked more or less exclusively across what we would call as digital first platforms, but actually to young people and kids, that's just where they hang around online. But I've spent most of my time exclusively working with IP across those channels and pivoted more recently into sport because I love sport. I'm a big fan of sport in general. We'll watch almost anything, but observed that sports is also grappling with this shift in media consumption and where young people are hanging out. To a large extent, it's very, it's kind of happened in entertainment. You would have seen it happen with the big studios and streamers. But sport is a little bit behind, and I'm very passionate that young people need sport in their lives. I can't imagine never having had sport in my life, nor my kids. So I'm really enjoying this foray into sport and helping broadcasters, streamers, rights owners, leagues, federations, greater understand kids. So that's me, and that's really what I do.
And why is so valuable what you're doing? I mean, I've seen it from my own personal experience. Like, I have a 9-year-old and he is just digital first, you know, like we don't even have like the terrestrial TV on anymore. It's literally YouTube, it's Roblox. And I've struggled for a long time to get my head around it, but that's just his world. And also in sports, I see this kind of fascination with digital and things are changing. But I think there's a lot of people in sport who are a bit nervous about it or don't really understand what it means, maybe a bit hesitant. So you talked about younger generations kind of consuming sport differently and this kind of shift that's happening. But kind of what has changed and how can, if you're a sports organization, what does that landscape look like for you?
The landscape, boy, I mean, in terms of the technological progress, that we've gone through. And what that has meant is that we all own more devices and ways to consume content, including kids, but we all do, than ever before. In the last 15, 20 years, the number of devices, phones, tablets, laptops, connected TVs, obviously they've come a long way. And the average age of phone ownership or first phone ownership is coming down. So this is something that Ofcom looks at in the UK. It used to be that you got your first phone maybe even 5 years ago when you went to high school. That put it around 11. Because there's so many devices in circulation, you've got them sat in drawers, that's coming down now. So it's kind of nudging 9 now. So not only is means of access, technology and device-wise much bigger than ever before. The amount of content that is available, vying for our attention, and particularly the attention of young people, has also grown alongside that. So I saw an insane stat the other day that every day, 82 years worth of content is uploaded to YouTube per day. And that's only video. We're not even talking about gaming. We're not talking about TikTok. So that's the kind of volume of content that we're talking about. Now, some of it is terrible, some of it's rubbish, some of it is excellent. But all of it is vying for a finite number of eyeballs, and we've only got 24 hours in our day. So this is the big change. It's how sports, in this case, is vying for attention within this attention economy that we've heard speaking about. So that brings with it a vast amount of choice, and cutting through that choice is really difficult. And then layer on top of that how that's fragmented the attention and fragmented fandom, because they've got access to any sport, any crochet, photography is vying with volleyball and tennis. Because they've got access to all of this content, there's fragmentation of fandom. So again, you've got to think about how, as a sports rights owner or a league at the center of that, how on earth do you operate in that new context? It used to be great because you had your media rights and you had your broadcasters, and there was a relatively small number of those. And actually, the only way to watch sport was on the telly through those broadcasters. Very neat, very controlled. That was fine. You could dictate how your audience and your fans consumed your content. Now you can't. All bets are off because there's creators creating content. They haven't got any rights. They're just creating content around maybe a live watch along. They're not breaking any rules. They've just got it on at the side and they're doing their own alt commentary over it, like Mark Goldbridge does. There is an infinite number of ways to engage and consume sport content that those sports rights owners don't necessarily understand yet, are struggling to orient businesses that are very kind of stuck in their ways and built for the old way of doing it. And then within that, you've got rights holders that some are paying money and some aren't. How do you trade off reaching the next generation of fans with those broadcasters that are still willing to pay? How do you monetize younger fans when they monetize via tiny micropayments and microtransactions, which is something that's very much come from gaming? So fair to say, it feels a little bit like a maelstrom. I mean, a maelstrom as people and professionals that work in sport, as you and I do, but I'm also a maelstrom as a parent, as you said, Mike. I'm a parent too. We will all worry about the amount of time our kids spend on screens and what are they watching there? How can we police it? How do we stay across that media literacy as well as trying to teach our kids to be media literate? So, yeah, it's hard. It's messy. I can't think of a time when it's been more tricky to be either an IP owner or a sports rights owner or a league, but that brings opportunity with it. And that's why I'm so positive about the opportunities. If we can reorient and pivot towards putting those young people and future generations in our crosshairs and figure out how sport now articulates and is relevant to them now.
And I want to dig into those opportunities, but there's so much in that. I think what fascinated me as a parent was that my kids weren't going towards a brand. You know, they weren't necessarily interested about content that was coming out from a particular like sports club or organization. It was literally just I don't want to say random, but somebody that they'd found on YouTube, and they would just engage with that content. And to me, I think, you know, policing that as a parent is one thing, but also as a sports organization, how do you like monetize that, involve that creator within your brand? And I guess the other thing as a parent that made me feel slightly better was that I was at the ISC conference last week, and EA Sports was speaking there, and they were talking actually about kids who were on their platform. They saw a link to physical participation in sport. And I'm so curious also how that works as well, because we're often given this narrative that screen time is bad and, you know, kids need to be getting out more. Whereas for some kids, that is their gateway into sport, you know, and I don't think we necessarily talk about that enough. So I'd kind of love your point of view on those, but also to dig into the opportunities that you talked about as well.
And really what you're talking about is entry points. And again, we'll come back to The entry points into sport used to be far fewer and pretty much set. You either went to a live game with your parents, usually, or your family, or you watched it on the TV through an ITV or a BBC, and then, eventually Sky Sports, but still pretty kind of fixed points of entry. Now, the points of entry can be anywhere, because to your point, it can also be dictated by the algorithm. Now, we're all slaves to the algorithm, both as consumers and as rights owners trying to navigate it. If the algorithm surfaces a creator's content, so a creator doing a watch along of a Champions League game and not the Champions League game itself, if it's available on said platform, then like you said, it might be sufficient to grab the interest and attention of a young person, and they'll stay with that. Well, that's not official. That's unofficial. So there's an element of getting comfortable as a league or a rights owner. Are we okay as long as they're interacting with it? Or are we going to insist they have to do it on owned and operated channels? That's a tension that I see. Arguably, I would suggest that getting more comfortable with them consuming it that way is better than losing them and not having them as a potential fan at all. And then you've got to think about how you move them around the ecosystem to those more formal owned and operated channels. So there's the algorithmic discovery can work against you. That can, and they're closely guarded secrets and changed at random, seemingly. So sometimes you can be riding high and other times you're nowhere. But that change in fandom that you spoke about as well, in terms of because young people have got the whole world's information, sporting teams in their pocket, it might not be that the local team is the one that they go for because they're not going to regular games with family. Yes, there might be an element of parental kind of, familial fandom that's passed down, but equally they see something to do with Barcelona, and by eight, they're a Barcelona fan. I've got one of those, still a Barcelona fan, and he's in his mid-teens, because they've had access and they just happened to fall in love with some content or a player. Iniesta, in my case, was what got my youngest into Barcelona, and now he's mad on Barcelona women's team, ironically. He's actually still loves Barcelona, but now he favours the women's team. So you've got any number of routes in, those gateways that you spoke about, but they're official and unofficial. And so again, it almost takes what I call, it's known as transmedia strategy in entertainment, in movies. Avatar is a great example. So you've got Avatar, it's movies, it's TV shows, it's video games. They have a transmedia strategy where their characters and their story is mapped across the whole ecosystem. And the idea is no matter what entry point, you keep them in that ecosystem. You want them to obsess and become fans of Avatar and hoover up all of the content and the merch that you create within that world. If you think about that in the context of sport, it starts to make sense. You think, okay, broadcast, OTT or subscription services, your social channels, gaming, they can all be points of entry, both official and unofficial, but they are points of entry. So how do you keep them within that ecosystem once you've got a fan in? How do you march them across those bridges between those platforms? And then when you build a relationship and you get to know them, then start thinking about those monetization questions that we all have to ask at some point. So that's a newer way to look at it, rather than just resorting to, no, the route into fandom is either attending a live game or paying to subscribe to an OTT and watch 90 minutes. Actually, now there are infinitely more points of entry that you have to get your head around, and you have to think about how you're going to show up there and how you're going to keep them within that ecosystem.
And have you got any examples of like brands who are doing this particularly well, and maybe brands that we can learn something from?
Yeah, there are some that I wouldn't say that there are any doing it perfectly, but there are some doing it better than others. And unfortunately, it tends to be the big US sports that are doing it better, because they do very much run more as entertainment businesses, shall we say. You look at the NBA, you look at the NFL. I just posted about NASCAR a few moments ago on LinkedIn, in terms of they've really smartly done a year-long deal with one of the biggest driving games on Roblox, and they're going to put NASCAR content in there for a whole year around events, around drivers, to start that conversation, to start drawing in users who might be there that are just there to drive cars faster around a track. And it might not really resonate with NASCAR, but start that conversation, start that dialogue. So you've got NBA. NBA are really interesting because they are using YouTube really well. So they have embraced the power of creators on YouTube. To up until this season, I believe they only used to let about 25 hours of content, of game footage. They used to make that available to creators. Well, that's not enough. But interestingly, they've increased that now. So to approved creators, the NBA is now letting them use 10 times that amount, 2,500 hours of footage from the season to create their content. And they've opened up 25,000 hours of archive content and basically said, go play, because they've acknowledged that creators on YouTube can be your superpower because they each have their own tone of voice, they each have their own following, they put their own spin on the content. So you get this spider web of reach that actually the NBA itself, with its existing social media strategy or its marketing strategy, couldn't even hope to reach. So the NBA is doing great stuff with creators. NASCAR doing great stuff on Roblox for the next generation of motorsport fans. And yeah, I see little pockets of it. Juventus have set up a creator lab, again, looking at how they're going to create formats and interesting content just for YouTube to bring fans into that ecosystem. So there's really, there's pockets of excellence, but arguably it could be done a lot better.
And I'm kind of fascinated by those pockets of excellence, those kind of first movers and innovators. But, I'm still relatively new to the sports world, but it can be quite traditional, especially in how it's led. Do you feel that this is something that will just become a domino effect over time? Do you feel that there's more knowledge needed at leadership level? I get the sense in sport that people see the opportunity because there's a lot of money that can be made, but still a bit of a nervousness or hesitation about it. Why do you think that is?
I think there's various reasons for that nervousness. There's a lack of understanding. I get it. It's hard. It's tricky. Young people are across all of these platforms. Their behaviors, their humor, what they want to watch seems so markedly different, even from ours as parents. So never mind the generation preceding us. So they're very alien. And so getting your head around that is not easy if you're a seasoned sport exec for whom, the last 20 years have really been pretty charming in the sense that you had big MG checks thrown at you by broadcasters and licensees, and you took them, you banked them, and then you waited for the next 5-7 year cycle to come around, and you usually did the same again. And now a lot of those are beginning to look, those rights deals are beginning to look not fit for purpose. And I use the example of Paris Saint-Germain on Roblox. And I'm really pleased that Paris Saint-Germain went on Roblox because, again, relatively early, first mover, great. But because of rights structures, football simulation rights, they are clearly with someone else who is not on Roblox, I imagine, their console gaming partner. So you couldn't kick a football in the Paris Saint-Germain experience on Roblox. Now, that doesn't matter wholly because there's lots of things you can do on Roblox. Mini games are fun. There's lots of different stuff that you could do. But at the very least, you might want to kick a football if you're in the Paris Saint-Germain experience. So that's an example of where those older rights structures, those established structures now don't quite fit how young people consume content, how they show their fandom. So there's that really needs to change. So it's establishment actually making an effort to understand these tricky cohorts that are young Gen Z and Gen A, but also taking a good hard look at established rights structures. Are they fit for purpose? Arguably now I would suggest that football simulation rights in gaming need to be split out because there's different ways. Gaming is a massive beast. It's not, you can't just lump it into one bucket anymore. So there's that. And then there's the monetization. which is usually the sticking point. Because again, business models and business plans are built on very measurable, very well established rights deals. You more or less know exactly how much you're going to get. And you can model that out in your 5-year plan, and you take it to the stakeholder and the board and they go, great, brilliant. When you've got young people they have subscription fatigue, because for the joy of being a fan of X sport, there's usually numerous subscriptions to be taken out. That's aside from, the Netflix, the Hulu, the Disney, all of the other subscriptions that they're also asked to subscribe to. So the subscription fatigue, that also, because of how they like to consume content and the type of content that they like to consume, again, when they subscribe to something, a vast swathe of what they subscribe to doesn't feel relevant. It's not made for them. Very often it's still made in that old TV show way. Well, that doesn't chime with, today's 11, 12-year-old. So there's a lot of wastage. So that funnels them to piracy, which again, to the establishment in sports is like just, young people don't want to pay for anything. They just want to go down the piracy route. I would argue that's more a symptom than an inherent trait of the younger generation. So you've got subscription fatigue, and then you've got the way that they consume content. So this social first fandom, they tend to find their favorite sports or their favorite creators on social first platforms. So that tends to mean making the content in a very different way. It's usually shorter form. It's usually shorter form in the first instance because you've got to pique their interest. And then they'll go in and they'll swim around in places like YouTube and they'll start hoovering up all of the content and the clips and the highlights. And there's this creator over here that I quite like what they do. And there'll be deep dives and there'll be analysis and there'll be behind the scenes stuff. So this idea that they only consume short form is wrong. The idea that their attention spans are shorter is wrong. It's actually interest spans that are shorter. If you can keep their interest, their attention spans are plenty long enough. So it completely changes the whole way you've got to think about your product. And that's the hard thing, because when potentially all you do is sell season tickets or you sell 90-minute games to broadcasters, and then we're saying, actually, you really need to think your whole product. That's a big shift. That's too big a shift for a lot of senior stakeholders and execs to get their head around.
But when you kind of say it like that, it makes total sense. I will see, even as like a 40-year-old woman, not a Gen Z, I will see something on Instagram, but it will pique my interest, and then I'll kind of go down a rabbit hole and I'll be there for hours.
Exactly. Yeah. So your attention span's fine, but it's the way it grabs your interest has changed.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I mean, when I look at my son, he can just get obsessed with, it's almost like a gateway drug. And what I've also noticed is the way that I don't want to say he can be monetized, but he will happily go on and buy digital experiences.
Yes.
Skins, things like that. He's so happy that he's got a yacht in Roblox because, of course, that's amazing to him. And, I'm fascinated from it from a sustainability point of view, because the traditional sports model is almost like we put a logo on it and we sell more merch. And once we've sold that physical merch, it's in the hands of the fan, and there's very little responsibility taken to that product having a sustainable end of life, or even the product being sustainable in any way. Whereas if we start to kind of transition to more digital experiences, do you think that is going to happen over the longer term? Do you think that younger audiences are more interested in that? How do you kind of see it from a sustainability and digital products rather than physical products point of view?
I think it's fascinating because, and I won't go too deep into it, but because you've got game platforms like Fortnite and Roblox that facilitate self-expression. So you can be anything you want to be on those platforms. So it's not even just changing your football shirt. You could be a cat one day. You could be a yellow sloth the next. You could be a yellow sloth wearing a Juventus kit, if you like. So it's opened up this new era of self-expression that is a part of fandom. It's wearing the badge. It's making a statement about who I am and where my affiliation is. So that's really interesting in terms of that digital sense. Now, the fact that you can choose the jersey, or in theory, choose the jersey of your favorite football team or your favorite women's volleyball team, and wear it in Roblox is great. And you might pay a few cents. I mean, most UGC on Roblox is less than a couple of dollars by the time you convert the Robux into a monetary value. But that means that affiliation might be more transient, slightly more fickle. Because on average, so in 2023, there were 165 billion avatar outfit changes in Roblox. And so some of those are 5-6 times a day, depending on which game and which experience you're in, which friends you're hanging out with, how you're feeling at the time. So that it facilitates a much more interesting expression of fandom, but maybe it's much more fickle. What's interesting now is that ability, what is being built into Roblox this year is that integration with Shopify. So if you encounter something in Roblox and you really love it and you do want the physical version, then you will be able to add it to a Shopify cart and check out. So that means that there would be a slightly more considered purchase. And that makes it quite interesting, because then you could have multiple fandoms, but actually you wouldn't necessarily then need multiple bits of merchandise that might end up in landfill. So there's an element of kind of trying things out, how it feels for size that Roblox and Fortnite and those platforms facilitate in terms of that self-expression, finding out who you are, your tribe, where you fit. And then when you feel like you care about something enough to want to own it, then potentially you can then go and add it to a cart and check out. What is also interesting, as someone who works in the apparel space like yourself, is the amount of signaling already that goes on Roblox. And it's something that I've posted about, because you've got lots of very talented digital designers on the platform, male and female, and they are spinning up some hugely innovative creations on there, including sport fits. And I've seen motor racing fits. I've seen volleyball fits. Dress to Impress is one of the biggest games on Roblox, which is a fashion game where you dress your avatar according to a theme. They have sport themes on there, and you have to pull together an Olympics themed outfit, and then some pull together equestrian outfits, some do these elaborate tennis outfits. There is a huge amount of signaling on platforms like that from young fans saying, this is what we'd love to wear. We're still shoving these shirts down our neck. And for girls in particular, all it is just the same guy's jersey, but with a slightly more feminine cut. And then you've got all of these digital designs over here, and they're going, hey, we'd really love to wear something like this. And a lot of apparel manufacturers and rights owners are just missing those signals. And it could be a huge opportunity, not just to make more money, obviously, but actually create merch that users are going to want to wear, not that's going to end up in landfill, in theory. So yeah, that's really interesting, is how these platforms not only open up different ways to express your fandom, but then how that articulates off the platform in actually how you're going to dress and show your fandom in the real world.
I'm slightly blown away with all of this, Jo. I absolutely love it. But it's the idea that actually, there's so much information in terms of what fans are telling us. And there is that real opportunity for young people to kind of play about with this. I think the shift really can't be underestimated from, this idea that a parent takes you to a game and you're going to support that team for the rest of your life. Whereas now, like you say, the entry points are just so different. And so really, to catch that attention, clubs really have to engage with this, otherwise they're going to miss such a massive span of potential fans.
Yes.
I've seen clubs like Manchester City have now got a metaverse officer. Do you think that's going to be almost like a common role in the next 5 years, where there'll be somebody within a sports organisation who is designated to kind of look at this, build it, research it?
Yeah, I do. And whether they're called a metaverse officer or innovation, I would really lobby hard for, because that tends to, that kind of role sits at the side. And really, for me, it needs to be front and center, because that role is what is forging those new fan relationships, fan development, growth, nurturing new fandom in these spaces. Well, that's not something that should be classed as just a peripheral role, that's pretty central to the future of your club or your league or your business. So I would argue it needs putting front and center, because very often they're the first roles that get cut as well, because it's innovation. So it's just perceived as, just playing around. But it's not. It's more important than that. Manchester City have been one of the more forward-thinking Premier League teams with this in this regard, and have been willing to experiment. And it's not always gone perfectly, but at least they're doing some stuff. They're testing and learning, which is the way to do it. I would argue that those roles need a seat at the table, because they do affect, well, everything. They affect everything from reach and awareness. They can plug into that funnel or that ecosystem that we spoke about, and can be quite powerful in bouncing them around the ecosystem, whether you send them to your YouTube channel or you try to get them to go to the OTT or whatever. But also commercially, again, because these future generations are the ones you're going to be asking to invest into your club or your fandom at some point, whether it is through a subscription service, or it is through buying merch, or it is through attending a game, or buying a pay-per-view for a game. So it affects all of those established roles in an organization: chief commercial officer, chief operating officer. So that this idea that innovation or metaverse or digital, whatever you want to call it, is something that actually is just a peripheral role, I think is wrong. I think it needs to be taken much more seriously, because I say this a lot. When you have worked in kids media as long as I have, it means that you work in the future business, because they're already way ahead of us. We're just trying to catch up as professionals, as parents, as rights owners. We're just trying to catch them up and figure out how we engage them. So given that really is the future of the business, it needs to be put at the core of the business and not just shoved at the side.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that, so many brands have absolutely massive marketing departments, and this is seen as something, it's not under marketing, it's something different. It is almost that R&D and innovation space. And like you say, that's always seen as a nice to have. But, as I say, if I just look at the amount of time my son spends on a screen, like that is where he's hanging out, that's, where his attention is going. And yeah, I do feel like there's a real opportunity here, and like you say, it's interesting that there isn't kind of more standout examples. And it seems like there is caution in there.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the sports business for me feels very, very risk averse. It's a follower industry, and it's pretty risk averse. And a lot of that comes from what I see as somebody who's relatively new to sport, is this, it feels like the fan relationship of late is very transactional. It's how quickly can I get you to part with your cash for this thing, whether it's a jersey or a subscription. And that transactional relationship, particularly where young people are concerned, doesn't work. And it doesn't work because of what we've said. They know the power of their attention, the value of their attention to anyone, whether you're a brand, a beauty brand, a fashion brand, or a sport brand. They know the value of their attention. They know that everybody wants it. So they're going to make you work at earning it. Now, they're either going to demand that you keep showing up and you're there for the duration. So again, this was one of the points I made on a LinkedIn post this morning with NASCAR, is they want to know that NASCAR is there. That's why NASCAR is saying, this is a year-long deal we've done with this great game. So we're going to keep showing up. We're going to keep showing you here what you can do. We'll put some new UGC items in there, new liveries, new cars, new events. We're going to keep showing up. We're investing in our relationship with you. That's what young people demand. Because if you try to rush the conversation about monetization, they're like, nah, no. We'll just go over here for somebody who is showing up for us. There's one game on Roblox called Jailbreak, and I've met the developers, the two developers of it, a few times. And they have updated that game week in, week out for 7 years. Now they're at 6-7 billion lifetime visits. It's made them a nice amount of cash, but actually it's because they showed up unflinchingly, unfailingly. They listened to what their audience was saying, and they iterated their game and they grew it over that period of 7 years. I can't think of many sports rights holders that would have that level of dedication to their relationship with young fans. And that's what you're dealing with. So I caution and, rights holders or leagues when I'm chatting to them. Okay, that's a very extreme example, but it does prove that you have got to show that you're willing to invest in that relationship and then start the monetization conversation. But it can't be the first thing you say. You have to show that you're showing up, you understand this is a platform that they love, so you're here, and you might not get it right first time, but if you tell us what you don't like, we'll stop doing that, and if you tell us what you do, we'll do a bit more of that, and then start building that new fan relationship, and then at some point have the monetization conversation, because that conversion will be so much more successful. But it requires a slightly longer horizon and a slightly less myopic view of the fan. And that can be a struggle.
I feel like there's a definite roadmap here, Joe, in terms of how you approach this. I wanted to talk a bit about purpose, because that was another thing that came up recently at this conference, about how purpose has kind of gone from a nice to have marketing to actually really being important to business strategy.
Yeah.
And we know that younger people are more aware and really do engage with fans who tend to feel like they have purpose. I'm trying to use my words carefully here. But how important is that within these new kind of digital platforms? Does that come across? Does that message of purpose really translate? And how do you do it with integrity? And do they care?
Definitely you have to do it from a place of integrity, because the young people's radar for spotting BS and inauthenticity is so much more finely tuned than ours is. So let's face it, you can't kid kids. So it has to come from that kind of place of authenticity. You can't just do the equivalent of, you can't greenwash or sport wash or whatever wash you want to apply and expect it to resonate. For me, the importance of doing that, it will work, but not at the expense of everything else that's core to that fandom. So again, you've got to think about, is it content that they really want to engage with? So if it's in sport, whether it's on YouTube or Roblox or Fortnite, is it fun? At the end of the day, again, it's got to be something that gets their interest and then sustains their attention. So is it fun? Is it delivering against what they want, their need state when they're on that platform, whether it's a 15-second scroll on TikTok or it's a slightly deeper dive on YouTube because they've got into something, or it's that interactive, immersive gameplay that Roblox facilitates? Is it delivering against their need state on that platform? And is it fun? Is it doing what they want to do there? Then within that, you've got to think about how you land that purpose. And again, I come back to, don't use it as an opportunity to bash young people over the head with something. It has to feel authentic and integrated. I said something the other day, you've got to integrate, not interrupt, because that's really important. When young people are living their lives across these platforms, fluidly switching between them, anything that jars, that interrupts, is likely to lose them. So again, you've got to fit in fluidly with your messaging, with whatever purpose or what you're trying to deliver within those consumption patterns. If you can do that, and it is doable, and I've seen lots of examples of it, then actually it can be quite powerful, because you will know this, young people do care very passionately. They are a most activist generation, but they're activist. They can also be a little bit, they can flip-flop, because their activism will get shoved to the side if something else comes along that actually takes priority. And by that, I'm talking about the fast fashion, because they do care about the environment. But at the end of the day, they haven't got a huge amount of money either. So if it means going to H&M or Primark or whatever and buying a cheap vest, they'll buy a cheap vest, even though they do actually care about where it ends up. But at that moment in time, it serves that need state. So it's a tricky balance, and it requires a whole bunch of skill sets and thought processes to be able to do it well. I've seen, coming back to the Roblox experiences, I've seen really interesting activations on there. I think of Vita Coco, the coconut water brand. They did a really interesting Roblox experience that took you through the process of how Vita Coco was made and what they do with the waste product from making coconut water. Now, that's the kind of thing that's interesting. That's something that users, they could go and they could collect coconuts and they could do this and the other, and it's informative, and they got some rewards in there. And actually, that's a really genuine, authentic way to kind of show up and again show either your environmental credentials or manufacturing processes. I could see it have applications again in fashion. You could go on a journey and see where the cotton was sourced and what safeguards are in place in terms of responsible and sourcing or ethical sourcing. So there's lots of different ways that it could be articulated across all of these platforms. It just needs to feel that it's native. And that's the important thing. It's not got to feel like the grown-up steaming in saying, you need to know this, because that's the surefire way to lose them.
100%. And I feel like you are a futurist, so I'm going to ask you for your predictions about the future. How do you think this is going to look in, say, 3 years' time?
Oh, I mean, I am fond of crystal ball gazing. I look at, if I'm doing that, I look at what a fan, in my head, I look at what a 15-year-old fan, whether they're in Manila or they're in Manchester, what's that 15-year-old fan look like in 3 or 4 years' time? Well, they've still got these. This is an extension of them. I'm holding up my phone. It is an extension of them. So if they are a fan, whether it's of volleyball or tennis or crochet, the likelihood is that they will consume. There would be more ways to reach them, more touch points than ever. But again, you're going to be competing with a lot of others. So again, it goes back into, what are they going to want? Well, in the morning, it might be catching up on what happened the night before across a league or a competition. So a digest, bring me up to speed. I need to go off to school or college feeling like I'm in the know for when it comes up. Then it might be that you look at some highlights or some clips. It could be in the car or on the walk to school or on the bus. And then you've got to think about when they, throughout the day, whether it's after school or whatever, they might come home and then it's like, right, I want to get in and play. This is, particularly boys, but increasingly girls, they want to get in and play. It's a more participatory relationship with the fan. So we've moved from passive consumption will still have a place. There's times when we just want to sit back and we want it to wash over us, or we want that information feeding to us so we can then draw on it later. But then there's other times when it's lean in. You want that participatory fandom. So getting stuck in, playing, doing whatever you do, going changing your avatar outfit to a new thing that's been launched on Roblox. And then it's about that connection. So again, you're a parent. Young people, they still want connection. They want community. They want to find their tribe. And whereas in our day, it was your school friends and they were all very local. Now it can be anywhere. It can be fan groups on messaging. It could be game party chat on Fortnite or EA Sports or Roblox. So there's connection, there's community, there's that participatory. So that means that the whole relationship, that future fan with sports, has got to be thought of in the round amongst, with everything else. And that basically means you stop thinking about the method of delivery and how you monetize them across each one of those channels, and each one doesn't really take heed of the other. When that fandom is going to be fluid around a number of platforms, you've got to think about how you articulate your brand, your IP, your competition, your championship across all of those, and how you make it relevant. And that's a complete mindset shift from how sports is currently articulated with fans. So that's a long-winded answer, but yeah, multi-platform, multi-strand, multifaceted, multi-everything.
And I mean, just multi-brilliant is what I think. But if somebody's listening to this who is in a sports organization, they're fascinated, first of all, definitely ring you up. But where do they start? What is the kind of way to navigate this? Because like you say, it's going to be kind of multiverse. There's so much to it. And if somebody's there kind of saying, I am really fascinated by this, but I don't know what I don't know.
Yes.
Where do they start, Joe?
Well, the important thing is to start, because this, it will be an evolution, not a revolution, but it will happen pretty quickly. Again, given the pace of technological change, it's not stopping, it's only increasing. So the good news is that with the core fan base, the existing core of fans that are aging up, but they're the payers, they're the ones who are the subscribers, it doesn't mean that you summarily have to now just throw them away. This is something new that needs to be almost backed in, but it is going through that process. It's not just setting up social media channels and thinking that you've got the youth covered. It's slightly more nuanced than that. So again, it's everything from looking at getting to know your future audience. Again, dive in, start to try and understand them, because you can't deliver to them unless you actually understand them. So there's the education piece. And yes, it's messy. And yes, it's across these platforms that a lot of the oldies don't really understand, but you're just going to have to roll up your sleeves and dive in, or find someone who does. When you can do that, then you've got to start thinking about those business models, those rights structures, again, that historically were just fine. Media rights deals were fine. You had your broadcasters, you had your first window, your second window, whatever. That's fine. Now that doesn't work. So you've got to then start going in and looking at those rights structures. How are they fit for purpose? How do they need changing to account for this multi-platform, multi-content type consumption? And then start building out how you transition that for the future fans. Because the worst thing to do would be just bury your head in the sand and wait until those older fans just drop off a cliff and then start your future fan strategy.
Joe, I've absolutely loved this conversation. And I think one of the reasons why I love it is that you put it in a way that is so practical and in plain language that we can all understand. I think that is a real skill.
Thank you.
And anybody who is fascinated by this, like I am, please contact Jo, follow her LinkedIn. I know you're super active on that. I feel like most of your posts are a bit of a masterclass, because you really do understand it. And, it can, I'd say, be an alienating space if you're not from a tech background. So I do feel like you are the gateway to knowledge of this. Just before we wrap up, is there anything that we haven't covered that you would have liked to have covered, or any questions that I didn't ask that you would like to?
Oh, goodness. No. I mean, this is it. It's a fabulous conversation and a very important one to have, because I come back to what I said at the beginning. Kids and young people need sport in their lives. I've worked in screen-based media for 20 years, so I'm part of the problem that we talk about, but kids and young people need sport in their lives as much as sport needs them for the future of their business. And I do say that quite often. So, but there is no getting away from the fact that they now exist and operate in a world that is technology-led, content-heavy, where their attention is super important. So it requires a new approach. And that does include, how do you get them to participate? We've spoken a lot about consuming content, of course, but actually you also at some point want them to go, you know what, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to pretend to be Dominic Solanke, or whoever their idol is, or try a new sport. Again, I was speaking with someone earlier talking about paddle. It could be that Roblox is the first time a young person understands what paddle is or plays paddle and gets to know the rules there. And then at some point you want them to say to their parents, right, I want to go and buy a paddle set. I want to go and play. We need to book a court. So that's really important too. And it's not to the detriment of participation. Participation is still a part of it, but it can be that entry point, back to the point you made at the very beginning. That entry point could be any number of other places. So again, it's how you bring them round and get them to the stage where some of them will want to participate, because that's what the future of sports really is going to rely on.
I'm so glad you raised that, Jo, because I feel so passionate about that. I'm from quite a working class background, and we just, you didn't have the opportunity to try certain sports. You couldn't afford the equipment. It just was not really ever on the radar, with two working parents. And so the fact that actually, my kids and really all kids could actually have access to sport through gaming and actually then be able to do it in the real life, rather than always thinking, well, it's detrimental, get off your screen. It's quite a place of privilege to say that, you know, because it's not quite as easy to go out and play something if you don't have the physical equipment. You don't have the coach to participate. So yeah, I think definitely changing that narrative and actually seeing this as a massive opportunity, and just seeing actually there's so many ways that you can engage younger people within sport. That doesn't necessarily revolve just around selling them something, you know. I think
Exactly.
It's a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
Joe, I could literally talk to you all day, and I'm sure I'm going to have you back on this podcast, because things I'm sure will move very quickly in this space. But it just remains for me to say thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'll definitely come back. I too feel like we could go into this for hours and hours.
100%. It might have to be a whole season, I think, next time.